Hello and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be taking a first look at an upcoming tier 10 British heavy tank called the Griffin. This tank is going to be something new for British heavies. It's going to be bringing an auto reloader mechanic to British tier 10 heavies. This thing, straight away, right? Have a look at it. It resembles a very familiar tier 9 American reward heavy tank, the Concept 1B. This thing looks like the tier 10 British Concept 1B, and it almost looks like it's going to be as good. So, let's get into it. Well, as I said, this thing is going to have an auto reloader mechanic, but it has really good DPM. One thing you normally get when you have auto reloaders or even auto loaders, they get bad DPM. This thing is different. It's getting 2,930 DPMs, just less than 3k. It's got 420 alpha, and its auto reloader is 2 rounds. How it's going to work is the first round takes 20 seconds to load, so a long time. However, the second round only takes 8.6 seconds to load. So how you play this tank effectively is you reload the first round, you reload the second round, and you always fire, where possible, that first round of the magazine and let it reload. You fire, you reload, you fire, you reload. You almost treat it like an 8.6 second reload cyclical gun. However, you do have the luxury of having a second 420 alpha round where needed. However, you should very rarely fire that, only firing that if you need to secure a kill, if it means you might die, or if it's right at the end of the game and you want to secure some extra damage, or if you feel you can fully reload for 28.6 seconds in order to get that next shot off. It is important to note, therefore, because it is an auto reloader, this thing cannot run a gun rammer. So, its DPM is pretty fixed to 2,930. But let's have a look at its gun handling. So, 2.4 seconds aim time, absolutely lovely. Dispersion, 0.36. This thing actually has quite good, gun handling. When you combine that with 263mm AP penetration and 311mm APCR gold penetration, yeah, this thing kind of is starting to look a little bit like the package. It's got good DPM for an auto reloader. It's got nice alpha at 420. It's got a auto reloading mechanic that basically allows it to play like a cyclical tank. However, with the ability to have a second 420 alpha shot in situations that require an 840 clip. Its penetration isn't horrendous. Don't get me wrong, it is not incredible. 311 gold at tier 10 is not the best. However, it's definitely workable. And its gun handling, not the best. However, really actually quite nice. The one thing to be mindful here with this gun handling, 2.4 seconds aim time, whilst really quite nice if you're playing this thing cyclically, it will mean you're allowed to, aim. If you are playing this thing and you want to play the double shot on it, so you want to fire both rounds, you are only just going to be fully aimed between shots, because it's got a 2.4 second aim time and a 2.5 second intra clip. So that's something to bear in mind. Maybe firing the first shot and then waiting for the second shot a little bit, making sure you're fully aimed. It's packing 10 degrees of gun depression, which is a lovely little perk, but at this point, that's very much standard for tier 10 and even British tanks in general, really. It's mobility. That's where this thing starts to lack a little bit. 40 forwards is slow. You are wanting to run a turbo on this tank for sure. Even then, it's less than 50. So it will struggle to keep up with the pace of today's ever increasing in speed games. However, it does make up for that with its, mechanic having the ability to have good DPM whilst having an autoloader. So, it's trade-offs. Good gun handling, good firepower, slightly worse mobility. In terms of survivability, its HP is on the lower end. 2k, not great. Full armor, 80? That looks quite bad. This thing, as you can see, has a huge lower plate. However, its upper hull does look quite well angled. However, it does look like it's got cheeks. So maybe not side scraping in this tank. It looks like maybe its side is going to be overmatchable. There's going to be some shot catchers in there. Maybe its upper hull is going to be okay against AP, APCR, but weak against heat. I think that thing is going to be pretty weak in terms of its hull armor. I am not particularly excited about that. However, its turret armor looks really quite nice. It looks like it's got a really narrow turret, very similar to the Concept 1B. Maybe it'll have some weak spots kind of on the upper and the lower part of the gun mantler, and maybe on kind of almost like the turret ring. However, it looks pretty good. It looks like it's got two smallish cupolas, which, maybe are completely hideable when you use the gun depression. In general, the turret armor looks great. This thing looks like it is designed completely to go into a hull down and sit there. Very similar to how you play the Concept 1B. When you get it into that hull down position, it is pretty much impervious. This tank looks very similar. As I said right at the start, it looks like the Tier 10, basically British Concept 1B. View range, actually, it's got 400mm. So, therefore, we are kind of getting an idea that this thing might be a little bit of the full package. But not quite. But we're going to compare it now and see. So we're going to compare it to the T10E5, the American Tier 10 tech tree, and the VZ55, the Czechoslovakian Tier 10 tech tree with the double shotgun. That is important to note. The E5 is a cyclical tank, so it fires one shot and reloads. So we're comparing the Griffin's single shot capabilities to that, but then we're comparing its double shot capabilities to the VZ5. In terms of DPM, the Griffin is winning. The E5 is known for having lovely DPM. Well, the Griffin is going to have even better DPM. So, bear that in mind. Alpha 420, it's better than the E5's 400, but not as good as the VZ's 490. Reload time. So, if we're playing it as a cyclical tank, it's 8.6 seconds, which is better than the E5. Combined with its higher alpha, it gives it its better DPM. When you play it as a double, if you were to fire both shots, its full reload is 28.6 seconds, which is worse than the VZ55, which would obviously massively hamper its DPM. Do remember, this thing's DPM is worked off playing this tank as a cyclical tank. In terms of dispersion, its gun handling is nowhere near to the E5's absolutely lovely 0.35 dispersion and 2 seconds aim time. However, it is very comparable to the VZ55 in terms of its dispersion, but its aim time is much better. So 0.38 dispersion, identical to the VZ. 2.4 seconds aim time is much better than the VZ, but as I said, its gun handling does not compare to the E5 overall. In terms of mobility, it's actually going to be better than the E5, which is actually quite interesting, but not at all comparable to the 50 that the VZ can go. Gun depression, it's actually better here. 10 degrees of gun depression for the Griffin compared to 8 for the E5 and 8 for the VZ. Really quite nice. It's going to work some funky positions, especially with that interesting looking turret. But here's where we get onto the downsides of the Griffin. Its HP, 200 less than the E5 and 100 less than the VZ. That is a big downside, and it's going to force the Griffin to be incredibly careful with its HP. You are going to have to play this tank in a very careful manner, not taking shots unnecessarily just to put one shot in return. You are going to want to be making sure if you're peeking to do damage, you are not going to take damage in return, because 2000 is a big limiting factor. View range, same as the E5. That's just a nice factor. Quality of life. In terms of armor, this is where I feel like the Griffin is weak. In terms of when it's not in a hull down. It's hull armor 80 compared to, the E5's lovely 254 and the VZ's 115. Yeah. I think it's going to suffer from pretty bad non-hull down issues, where if you catch this thing on flat ground where it's not hull down, I think its hull is going to be butter. However, the story changes when it gets into a hull down, where it's going to have 250 frontally, which I think is going to be actually more effective, maybe 310, 330. I think this thing is going to be pretty brutal in a hull down, almost very similar to tanks like the VZ when you get it in a hull down. When it has got its cupola, the Griffin is going to be very similar to that. Obviously, it's going to be better in a hull down than the E5, because the E5 does have its pretty horrendous tumor on top that obviously only really good players can mitigate. But I feel like the Griffin is just kind of fully focused to being a hull down monster, really. Maybe not necessarily a monster, that's probably the wrong word, but a hull down tank that is strong when it gets to that position. In terms of penetration, it actually has the best standard penetration, 263 AP compared to 258 AP and 260 AP, but its gold is weak. As I said, it's better than the VZ 311 compared to 306, but it does not in any world compare to the E5's absolutely gorgeous 340 millimeters of heat. So there you go. That is the Griffin. You've got a nice little bit of an idea of how this tank's going to play. I feel it's going to play very similar to a Concept 1B. However, it's just going to have the opportunity and the capability to have 2 shots for an 840 clip where it requires. But most of the time, it should be played as a cyclical tank, firing 1 shot, 1 shot, 1 shot, 1 shot, 1 shot, reloading in between each. This tank looks pretty good. Personally, I am actually quite excited about this tank. I mean, I'm British. I like British tanks. British bias. But this tank looks very much exciting. It looks like it's going to have quite an engaging, exciting play style that will reward taking good positions and being a good player. As to when we're going to see it, God knows. This could be an assembly shop tank. It could be a future Clan Wars reward tank. It could be a collaboration tank. Who knows? Maybe we could see our first ever tier 10 collaboration tank. It could also, remember, we are coming up to being, coming up to the end of this, 2024, 2025's Onslaught seasons. Maybe this could be, the next year's Onslaught reward tank. We don't really quite know yet. But I'm quite excited about this tank. I think it looks quite good. It has its weaknesses, its mobility, its lower penetration. However, it definitely has a lot of upsides, DPM, its flexibility, and its actually decent gun handling. So, do let me know down in the comments what you think about this tank. Do you agree? Do you disagree with me? And if you did like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you all again very soon.